My name is Madeline. I'm 34 years old, and I'm standing in a courtroom watching my entire family sit on the prosecution side. They're here to destroy me for helping immigrant families with legal documents. My mother won't look at me. My father's jaw is set in that familiar way that means he's already decided I'm guilty. But what they don't know is that Judge Thompson has a manila folder on her desk that's about to change everything. Before I tell you how my own blood tried to destroy me, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that subscribe button, because this story will show you that sometimes your biggest enemies share your last name. Growing up as the eldest daughter in our household meant carrying everyone else's dreams on my shoulders. My father built his accounting firm from nothing, starting with just a desk in our garage when I was 5. By the time I turned 16, I was spending my afternoons filing papers in his office, learning the rhythm of legal documents, tax forms, and bureaucratic language that would later save so many lives. Our house in suburban Dallas was always full of contradictions. We had the perfect lawn, the kind that made neighbors stop and compliment my mother. She would smile, her lipstick never smudged, and tell them how blessed we were. But inside those walls, I learned early that love came with conditions. Good grades weren't enough. They had to be better than everyone else's. Helping with dinner wasn't enough. The table had to be set like we were expecting the governor. I remember the first time I helped someone with immigration paperwork. Mrs. Nguyen from our church had been crying in the parking lot, clutching forms she couldn't understand. Her English was broken, but her fear was universal. I was 19, home from college for Thanksgiving. I sat with her for 3 hours translating, explaining, making sure every box was filled correctly. When she hugged me afterward, tears streaming down her face, something shifted inside me. This was what mattered. My brother Kevin was different. 2 years younger, but somehow always the favorite. While I was studying for my accounting degree, the practical choice my father approved, Kevin was failing out of community college. But when he laughed at Dad's jokes and promised he'd join the firm someday, all was forgiven. The first time I covered his gambling debt, it was only $800. Just a bad poker night, he said. By the time I was 25, I'd given him nearly $15,000 money I'd saved working overtime at Dad's firm money. That was supposed to be for law school. Jessica came last, the baby who could do no wrong until she did everything wrong. 5 years younger than me, she grew up watching me take responsibility for everyone else's failures. When she got into law school, the same one I dreamed of attending, my parents threw a party. They invited everyone we knew. My mother pulled me aside that night, champagne glass in hand, and said I should be proud of my sister. She was going to be a real professional, not like me, stuck doing bookkeeping. The family dinners were performances we all knew our parts in. Dad would talk about the firm's success clients. He'd landed deals he'd made. Mom would praise Kevin's potential, always potential, never actual achievement. Jessica would share stories from law school cases she was studying, professors who noticed her brilliance. And I would sit there quiet, the one who kept the firm's books balanced, who handled the difficult clients who worked 60-hour weeks without complaint. It was during one of these dinners that everything started to crack. Dad clinked his wine glass, that smile on his face that meant he was about to make an announcement. Kevin was finally going to join the firm, he said. Not just join, but eventually take over. My brother, who hadn't worked a full month in his life, was being handed the business I'd helped build. I looked around the table, waiting for someone to object, to point out the obvious insanity of this decision. But Mom was beaming. Jessica was congratulating Kevin, and I realized I had become invisible in my own story. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through my apartment, looking at the thank you cards I'd kept from people I'd helped over the years. Mrs. Nguyen's family, the Hernandez children, who wrote in crayon Mr. Kim, who'd sent a photo from his citizenship ceremony. These people saw me. These people needed what I could offer. By morning, I had made my decision. If my family wouldn't value what I could do, maybe it was time to do it for people who would. The next day at the firm, I went through the motions, but my mind was elsewhere. Every time Dad walked past my desk without acknowledging me, every time Kevin showed up late reeking of alcohol, every time Mom called to remind me to support my siblings, I felt my resolve strengthening. I started staying late, not for overtime, but to research. Immigration law document preparation, the careful line between helping and practicing law without a license. I could help people navigate the system without giving legal advice. I could be their translator, their organizer, their support. 3 weeks later, I filed the paperwork to start my own document preparation service. Not a law firm, just a service to help people understand and complete complex forms. The fee would be minimal, just enough to cover costs and keep the lights on. This wasn't about money. This was about purpose. 6 months before that courtroom scene that would change everything, I was operating my document service from a small office in East Dallas. The space wasn't much, just 2 rooms above a Vietnamese restaurant, but the location was perfect. The community knew where to find me, and the smell of pho reminded me why I was doing this. My day started before dawn, preparing documents for families who worked multiple jobs and could only meet early or late. I never called myself a lawyer, never gave legal advice. I was careful, so careful to explain that I was just helping with paperwork, making sure forms were filled out correctly, translating when needed. But to the families I helped, I was something more. I was hope in a system that seemed designed to exclude them. Mrs. Rodriguez found me through her church. She had been in the country for 15 years, raised 3 children who were all citizens, but her own paperwork had errors from decades ago. The lawyer she'd paid $5,000 to had disappeared with her money. She came to me with a box of documents, some in Spanish, some in English, all mixed with the debris of a life lived in fear of deportation. We spent weeks sorting through everything. I helped her request copies of missing documents, organized everything chronologically prepared, detailed explanations for the inconsistencies. When she needed legal advice, I referred her to an immigration attorney who did pro bono work. But the groundwork, the foundation that would save her case, we built that together in my little office, surrounded by the sounds of the neighborhood coming alive each morning. Word spread the way it does in tight communities. Maria told her cousin, who told her neighbor, who told her coworker. Soon, I had more clients than I could handle. I raised my fees slightly, just enough to hire Rosa, a paralegal student who understood what we were doing. We weren't practicing law. We were practicing humanity. But success has a way of attracting attention. It was Jessica who found out first. She'd been assigned to help at a legal clinic, the kind of volunteer work that looks good on resumes. One of my clients mentioned my name, not knowing the connection. Jessica pressed for details, and by the time she came to my apartment that night, she had a business card I'd given to someone and a look of disgust I'd never seen before. "You're pretending to be me," she said, throwing the card on my coffee table. "You're jealous that I'm in law school, so you're playing lawyer with immigrants who don't know better." I tried to explain. I showed her my disclaimers, the careful language I used, the referrals I made to actual attorneys when legal advice was needed. But Jessica had already made up her mind. This was about more than what I was doing. This was about years of resentment, of competing for approval that I'd stopped seeking, and she couldn't stop needing. The family meeting was scheduled for Sunday after church. I knew what was coming when I walked into my parents' house and saw them all seated in the living room like a tribunal. Dad had my business cards spread on the coffee table. Mom sat with her arms crossed. Kevin lounged in the corner smirking. Jessica had prepared notes. Actual notes like this was a court proceeding. "You're embarrassing this family," Dad started without preamble. "People are talking. They think my daughter is some kind of illegal paralegal." I tried to stay calm, to explain what I actually did, how I helped people who had nowhere else to turn. But every word I said seemed to make them angrier. Mom accused me of trying to overshadow Jessica's legitimate career. Kevin suggested I was probably breaking federal laws. Jessica, with her 1 year of law school, lectured me about unauthorized practice of law, throwing around terms she'd just learned, twisting them to fit her narrative. "You're not a real lawyer," Dad said, standing up, his voice rising with each word. "Stop pretending to be something you're not. You're an accountant, barely that. Stay in your lane." Those words, "stay in your lane," echoed in my head as he continued. He'd given me an ultimatum. Stop immediately, close everything down, apologize to the family for the embarrassment, or leave. Not just leave the house, but leave the family. Be cut off completely. I looked at each of them. My mother, who had never once said she was proud of me. My father, who saw me as nothing more than free labor for his firm. Kevin, who had taken so much from me without a single thank you. And Jessica, whose success was built on the foundation of my sacrifices. "I help people," I said quietly. "I help people who have no one else. I'm not stopping." The silence that followed was suffocating. Dad's face turned red, then purple. Mom started crying, the kind of theatrical tears she deployed when she wanted to guilt someone into submission. Kevin laughed, actually laughed, and said I'd regret this. Jessica just shook her head, gathering her notes like a prosecutor who'd already won. I left that house knowing I'd crossed a line I could never uncross. But what I didn't know was that they had already begun planning their retaliation. While I was trying to explain myself, Kevin had been recording everything on his phone. While I was defending my work, Jessica was already drafting a complaint to the state bar. While I was choosing my purpose over my family, they were choosing to destroy me. The next few weeks felt almost normal. I continued my work, helped more families, referred cases to attorneys when needed. Rosa and I developed a system that was even more careful, more documented. Every client signed multiple forms acknowledging I wasn't an attorney. Every interaction was logged. I thought I was protecting myself. I didn't realize the attack would come from angles I never expected. It started small. Clients would cancel appointments seeming nervous. Some mentioned getting calls warning them about using my services. Then Rosa quit suddenly, saying she couldn't afford any controversy while in school. The Vietnamese restaurant downstairs told me they'd received health department complaints that seemed targeted at driving them to evict me. But I held on. The families who really needed help still came, and that was enough. Until the morning I found an eviction notice on my apartment door. My father, who had co-signed my lease years ago when I first moved out, had somehow convinced the landlord I was conducting illegal business from the residence. 24 hours later, my bank called. The account I'd had since college, the one my father had helped me open, was frozen pending investigation of fraudulent activity. I was being systematically destroyed, and the precision of it told me this wasn't just my father's rage. This had Jessica's legal knowledge behind it, Kevin's cruelty driving it, and my mother's cold approval sanctioning it. They weren't just trying to stop me, they were trying to erase me. 3 months after that family meeting, I was living in a weekly motel, accessing my business email from the library, and meeting clients in a church basement that Father Martinez had offered when he heard about my situation. The systematic destruction my family had orchestrated was almost complete, but what they didn't understand was that broken people don't always stay broken. The anonymous complaints to the state bar had started arriving 2 weeks after I left my parents' house. Each one was carefully crafted, containing just enough truth twisted with lies to sound credible. They claimed I was giving legal advice, charging excessive fees, targeting vulnerable immigrants. The language was too sophisticated for Kevin, too precise for my parents. Jessica's handiwork was all over them, her law school vocabulary weaponized against me. James Chen found me on my worst day. I was sitting in the church basement, surrounded by boxes of client files I'd managed to save, trying to figure out how to continue helping people when I could barely help myself. He walked in wearing an expensive suit that should have made me suspicious, but his eyes were kind. He was an immigration attorney, he said, and he'd been hearing about my work from mutual clients. "They trust you," he said simply. "That's rare in this field." He'd also heard about my troubles. The immigrant community talks, and the sudden campaign against me hadn't gone unnoticed. He offered to review my practices pro bono, to ensure everything was above board. What he found after examining my documents, my disclaimers, my careful referral system made him angry on my behalf. "You're doing everything right," he said. "More than right. You're meticulous. This isn't about unauthorized practice. This is about control." While James helped me shore up my legal position, the attacks intensified. Kevin had somehow gotten access to my client files, probably during one of his late-night raids on my old office before I could move everything. He was calling clients, pretending to be from immigration services, warning them that using my services could hurt their cases. Mrs. Rodriguez called me crying one night, terrified that helping me would lead to her deportation. The cruelest blow came when I discovered the extent of Jessica's betrayal. She had created a fake email account in my name and sent messages to immigration attorneys in the area, messages that made me look unstable, unprofessional. She'd learned about defamation law, learned exactly how far she could go without crossing into something actionable. Every move was calculated to destroy my reputation while keeping herself legally safe. I found out about the emails when Maria misses. Rodriguez's daughter, who is now in law school, showed me one that her professor had received. Maria had been following my situation, offering to help however she could. She'd spent hours researching similar cases, finding precedents that might help. Her professor, confused by the bizarre email supposedly from me, had shown it to her knowing she knew me. "This isn't your writing style," Maria said. "Whoever wrote this doesn't know you at all." But the damage was spreading. Local immigration attorneys who might have hired me were now wary. Clients were fearful. Even Father Martinez was getting pressure from the diocese, anonymous concerns about the church harboring illegal activities. Then my mother made her move. She had always been the strategist in the family, the one who worked behind scenes while Dad raged in the spotlight. She reached out to community leaders, women she'd known for decades, spreading concern about my mental health. Her daughter had suffered a breakdown. She told them was acting erratically, possibly putting vulnerable people at risk. It was masterful in its cruelty, using maternal concern as a weapon. I started documenting everything obsessively. Every threatening voicemail from Kevin, every false complaint, every instance of sabotage. James helped me organize it all into a timeline that showed the coordinated nature of the attacks. We were building a defense, but I didn't know if it would be enough. The formal complaint to the state bar was filed on a Tuesday. I remember because I was helping Mr. Chen, no relation to James, with his naturalization paperwork when the process server found me. The charges were serious, unauthorized practice of law fraud, exploitation of vulnerable populations. The complainants were listed as concerned citizens, but I recognized the careful language, the strategic accusations. My family had hired an attorney, someone expensive and connected, standing there in the church basement holding papers that could end everything I'd worked for. I felt something break inside me. Not my spirit, but something else. The last thread of hope that my family might choose love over control. They hadn't just cut me off. They were trying to destroy my ability to exist in the world without them. James read through the complaint that night. He identified 3 attorneys working for my family, all from a firm that specialized in professional destruction disguised as ethics enforcement. They had submitted evidence, my business cards, emails taken out of context, statements from clients who had clearly been coached or coerced. "They're going for criminal charges," James said quietly. "This isn't just about stopping you. They want you in prison." The local newspaper article appeared 2 days later. "Local woman accused of illegal legal practice," ran with a photo of me that Jessica had provided one from her law school acceptance party, where I looked tired and overwhelmed. The article quoted unnamed sources expressing concern about vulnerable immigrants being exploited. It mentioned my father's successful accounting firm, painting me as a black sheep, trying to capitalize on the family's reputation. But something unexpected happened after that article ran. My phone started ringing with offers of support. Former clients called expressing outrage. Mrs. Rodriguez organized a group of families I'd helped, all ready to testify on my behalf. The Vietnamese restaurant owner offered to testify about the suspicious health department complaints. Father Martinez announced at Mass that the church stood behind me, consequences be damned. The summons for the court hearing arrived on a Thursday, giving me 2 weeks to prepare. The hearing would determine whether criminal charges would proceed, whether I would lose everything. My family had escalated beyond anything I'd imagined possible, but they had also made a mistake. They had assumed I would crumble, that isolation would break me. They didn't understand that sometimes when you lose the family you're born into, you find the family you're meant to have. James offered to represent me, but I couldn't afford him, and he couldn't afford to work for free on something this complex. I would have to represent myself, facing my family's team of attorneys alone. But as I prepared my defense, gathering testimonies, organizing evidence, preparing to fight for my survival, I kept thinking about that manila folder I'd glimpsed on Judge Thompson's desk during a previous visit to the courthouse for a client. She had been watching this case develop, and judges don't gather manila folders without reason. The morning of the hearing arrived gray and humid, typical Houston weather, that made everything feel heavier than it was. I stood in my studio apartment, really just a converted garage I'd found through one of my clients, and put on my only suit. Navy blue, bought years ago for a cousin's wedding, now hanging loose on a frame that had forgotten regular meals. My hands shook as I buttoned the jacket. Not from fear exactly, but from the surreal nature of what was happening. 6 months ago, I had been part of a family. Now that same family had hired 3 attorneys from Brennan Davidson and Associates, a firm known for destroying careers with surgical precision. I'd looked them up. Their retainer alone was more than I'd made in the last 3 years. James called while I was drinking coffee that tasted like cardboard. "Remember," he said, "stick to facts. Don't let them make this about emotion. You did nothing wrong." But this was entirely about emotion. My family's rage that I had chosen my own path. Their humiliation that I had refused to stay in the lane they'd assigned me. Their fear that my independence might mean they weren't as essential as they'd believed themselves to be. The courthouse was already busy when I arrived. I saw them immediately clustered near the metal detectors like a small army. Dad in his best suit, the one he wore for major clients. Mom in pearls, her armor of respectability. Kevin trying to look serious but unable to hide his smirk. Jessica in her law school blazer holding a leather portfolio like a shield. Behind them, their legal team 3 attorneys who looked like they ate people like me for breakfast. I walked past them without acknowledgement, though I felt my mother's eyes follow me. For a moment, just a heartbeat, I thought I saw something flicker across her face. Regret, doubt. But then she turned to whisper to their lead attorney, and I knew nothing had changed. Courtroom 3B was smaller than I'd expected. Movies make courtrooms look grand, imposing. This was just a room with bad fluorescent lighting and uncomfortable benches. But sitting behind the bench was Judge Harriet Thompson, and everything about her commanded respect. Mid-60s, silver hair pulled back severely, eyes that missed nothing. She was known for being tough, but fair, for seeing through bullshit with laser precision. I took my place at the defendant's table alone. My family and their attorneys occupied the plaintiff's side, spreading out papers, whispering strategies. The contrast was deliberate, meant to emphasize my isolation, my lack of resources. They wanted the judge to see David versus Goliath, except they'd cast themselves as David. "Case number 2024 to 3847, the bailiff announced. "Complaint regarding unauthorized practice of law." The lead attorney, Mr. Brennan himself, stood. His opening statement was a masterpiece of manipulation. He painted me as a predator, targeting desperate immigrants using my family connection to establish false credibility, charging excessive fees for services I wasn't qualified to provide. He presented my business cards like evidence of a crime read selectively from emails to make routine document assistance sound like legal malpractice. "The defendant," he said, voice dripping with false concern, "has betrayed not only professional ethics but also the vulnerable population she claims to serve." Then came the witnesses. Kevin testified first, his prepared statement full of lies so bold I had to grip the table to keep from responding. He claimed I had told him I was smarter than real lawyers, that I had bragged about fooling immigrants into thinking I was an attorney. His performance was polished, rehearsed. Someone had coached him well. Jessica followed, tears already forming before she spoke. She testified about finding my business cards, about her shock and horror at discovering my deception. She presented herself as the concerned sister, the real law student trying to protect the public from my dangerous activities. She actually said dangerous, like I was performing surgery without a license, instead of helping people fill out forms. 2 clients testified, but their words weren't their own. Mr. Patel, who I'd helped with his green card application, repeated phrases about feeling misled, about thinking I was a real attorney. But his eyes never met mine, and his hands shook as he spoke. Mrs. Williams, whose son's visa application I'd assisted with, claimed I'd charged her $3,000. The real fee had been $300, and I had the receipts to prove it, but she spoke her lies with the flat tone of someone who'd been threatened or paid. My father didn't testify, but his presence was felt in every word. This was his production, his final attempt to force me back into submission. My mother sat perfectly still, her face a mask of wounded dignity, playing the role of the long-suffering parent, failed by an ungrateful child. Throughout it all, Judge Thompson said little. She took notes, asked occasional clarifying questions, but her expression revealed nothing. I noticed, though, that she kept glancing at a manila folder on her desk, one she hadn't opened yet. When Brennan rested their case, Judge Thompson turned to me. "Ms. Madeline, are you representing yourself?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Do you have any witnesses?" "No, Your Honor, but I have evidence to present." She nodded. "Proceed." I stood on legs that felt like water. This was my moment, possibly my only moment, to save everything I'd worked for. I started with my disclaimers, the forms every client signed acknowledging I wasn't an attorney. I showed my referral list, the attorneys I sent clients to when they needed actual legal advice. I presented my fee structure, minimal charges that barely covered costs. Your Honor, I said, finding my voice. I have never claimed to be an attorney. I have never provided legal advice. I help people understand forms, translate documents, organize paperwork. When they need legal services, I refer them to qualified attorneys like James Chen, who has served the immigration community for 15 years. I showed her thank you cards from clients, not the ones who testified against me, but others. People who'd been lost in a system designed to confuse them, who just needed someone to explain what Form A meant and where to sign on Form B. I presented my educational materials, all clearly marked with disclaimers about seeking legal advice from licensed attorneys. But I knew it wasn't enough. Their attorneys had more resources, more polish. My family had turned my compassion into something that looked like exploitation. Judge Thompson listened, but I couldn't read her face. Then she asked an unexpected question. Ms. Madeline, how long have you been providing these services? 2.5 years, Your Honor. And in that time, have you kept records of all your clients? Yes, Your Honor. Every interaction is documented. She nodded, then turned to Brennan. Counselor, your complaint mentions specific dates of alleged violations: October 15th, November 3rd, December 18th of last year. Do you have evidence of unauthorized practice on those specific dates? Brennan shuffled papers, confident. We have testimony that the defendant was providing services on those dates, Your Honor. Judge Thompson picked up the manila folder. Interesting. Because according to my records, Ms. Madeline was providing document assistance to Mrs. Isabella Thompson on those exact dates. My mother. The courtroom went silent. You could hear the air conditioning humming, someone coughing in the hallway. Brennan's mouth opened, then closed. My family looked at each other in confusion. I stood frozen, trying to process what was happening. Judge Thompson continued, her voice now sharp as a blade. My mother, a 78-year-old Italian immigrant, needed help with her naturalization papers. Ms. Madeline spent hours with her, never once claiming to be an attorney, never once providing legal advice. She helped my mother understand forms that were confusing even to me, and I've been a judge for 20 years. She charged my mother $150 for 12 hours of work. She opened the folder, pulling out documents. I have here a letter from my mother, notarized, describing Ms. Madeline's services. I have receipts, disclaimers. My mother signed referral letters to immigration attorneys for actual legal questions. I also have something else. She pulled out another set of papers. An investigation I requested into this complaint before today's hearing. It seems the plaintiffs have some interesting issues of their own. Mr. Kevin, would you like to discuss the gambling debts that led to your fraudulent loan applications? Or should we talk about the threatening messages you've sent to Ms. Madeline's clients? Kevin went pale. Dad started to stand, but his attorney pulled him down. Mrs. Jessica, the judge continued, law students are held to ethical standards. Creating fake email accounts to defame someone, coaching witnesses to lie under oath, these are serious violations. The state bar will be very interested in this behavior before you're even admitted to practice. Jessica started crying, real tears this time. My mother reached for her, but Jessica pulled away. And Mr. and Mrs. Madeline's parents. Judge Thompson's voice was ice now. Filing false complaints, conspiracy to commit fraud, malicious prosecution. These aren't just civil matters, these are crimes. Brennan tried to interject. Your Honor, with all due respect, you should recuse yourself given your personal connection. My personal connection is exactly why I didn't recuse myself, Counselor. I've seen firsthand what Ms. Madeline does. She helps people like my mother navigate a system that's intentionally complex. She does it legally, ethically, and with more care than many licensed attorneys I've encountered. This complaint isn't about protecting the public. It's about a family trying to destroy someone who refused to be controlled. She turned to me. Ms. Madeline, do you wish to press charges for malicious prosecution? I looked at my family. Dad's face was purple with rage. Mom had gone white. Kevin was calculating exits. Jessica was sobbing. They looked smaller, somehow diminished. All their power had come from my believing they had it. Not at this time, Your Honor. I just want this to end, Judge Thompson nodded. Judge Thompson. The complaint is dismissed with prejudice. It cannot be refiled. Furthermore, I'm ordering the plaintiffs to pay all court costs and Ms. Madeline's damages, which I'm setting at $50,000 for lost business defamation and emotional distress. Your Honor, Brennan protested. Would you prefer I refer this for criminal prosecution, counselor? I have enough evidence here for conspiracy charges. Brennan sat down. Judge Thompson continued. I'm also granting a restraining order. The plaintiffs are not to contact Ms. Madeline, her clients, or anyone associated with her business. Any violation will result in immediate arrest. And I'm referring this matter to the State Bar for investigation of potential charges against Jessica and any attorney who knowingly submitted false statements to this court. She looked at me one more time. Ms. Madeline, the court recognizes that your document preparation service fills a vital need in our community. You've done nothing wrong. In fact, you've done everything right under extremely difficult circumstances. This court apologizes that you've had to endure this malicious prosecution from people who should have protected you. The gavel came down like thunder. The silence after Judge Thompson's gavel felt like the moment after lightning strikes when the air itself seems stunned. I stood at the defendant's table, unable to move, watching my family's world collapse in real time. Dad's face cycled through colors I'd never seen on human skin. Mom clutched her pearls so tightly I thought they might shatter. Kevin had his head in his hands. Jessica was hyperventilating into her leather portfolio. Brennan was already packing his briefcase, his associates following suit. He leaned over to my father, his whisper harsh enough to carry, "You told us she was practicing law illegally. You gave us fabricated evidence. Our firm's reputation is now at risk because of your lies. Expect our final invoice immediately and expect it to include damages." As they left, Brennan paused at my table. For a moment, his professional mask slipped. "You did good work here," he said quietly. "Your documentation was impeccable. If you ever want a job as a paralegal, call me." Then louder for the room to hear, "Though I suspect you'll be in law school soon enough." The courtroom began to empty, but my family remained frozen in place. Judge Thompson had left through her chambers, but her presence lingered like a storm cloud. The bailiff stood by the door, watching, waiting to ensure the restraining order was understood. It was Dad who broke first. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This isn't over," he said to no one in particular, or maybe to everyone. "That judge was biased. We'll appeal." "No, you won't." A new voice came from the gallery. James Chen walked forward, and he wasn't alone. Behind him were 5 other immigration attorneys, all established, all respected. "We've been watching this case, Mr. Thompson. Any further action against Madeline will be met by our collective response. She's under our protection now." Mom finally spoke, her voice cracking. "We're her family." "No," said Mrs. Rodriguez, who had been sitting in the back row. "We are her family. Those of us she helped when no one else would. You—" She looked at them with disgust. "You are just people who share her blood." More people started filing in from the hallway. They had been waiting outside my clients, their families. Mr. Nguyen with his citizenship certificate. The Patel family, whose reunification I'd helped facilitate. Maria with her law school classmates. Father Martinez in his collar. The Vietnamese restaurant owner. People whose lives I'd touched who had come to show that I wasn't alone. Kevin tried to leave, but the bailiff stopped him. "The judge wants to speak with you about those fraudulent loan applications she mentioned. You might want to get your own attorney." That broke Jessica completely. She ran from the courtroom, her sobs echoing down the marble hallway. Mom followed, calling her name. Dad stood there looking at me with something I'd never seen in his eyes before. Not love, not pride, but fear. He was afraid of me, of what I'd become without him. "You destroyed our family," he said. "No," I replied, finding my voice at last. "I revealed it." He left then, his expensive shoes clicking against the floor, each step taking him further from the man he'd pretended to be. The courtroom door closed behind him, with a finality that felt like the end of a chapter I'd been trying to finish for years. James approached me smiling. "Law school starts in the fall. Several of us have written recommendation letters. There's also a scholarship specifically for people who've demonstrated commitment to immigrant services. I think you're a perfect candidate." Maria hugged me, tears in her eyes. You saved my mother. Now you can save so many more, but with a law degree this time. The next hours blurred together. Papers to sign for the restraining order, bank accounts to unfreeze, my apartment to reclaim. The $50,000 judgment wouldn't come easily from my family, but it would come. James had already volunteered his firm to insure it. 3 days later, Jessica called James's office knowing she couldn't contact me directly. She wanted to apologize to explain. She was withdrawing from law school, she said. The state bar investigation would likely ban her from ever practicing law. She wanted me to know she was seeking therapy, that she finally understood how sick their family dynamic had been. James relayed the message, but I wasn't ready to respond. Maybe someday, but not yet. Kevin was arrested 2 weeks later for fraud unrelated to our case. It seemed once investigators started looking, they found years of schemes, debts, and deceptions. He called me from jail using another inmate's phone privilege, begging for help. I hung up and reported the violation of the restraining order. He got another 6 months. Dad's accounting firm imploded within a month. Clients don't trust accountants who file false legal complaints. Several major contracts canceled. Without me managing the books, without my free labor, the inefficiencies I'd been covering became apparent. He had to sell the business at a loss to cover his debts and the judgment against me. Mom tried to salvage her social standing, but gossip travels fast in immigrant communities. The woman who had tried to destroy her daughter for helping others became a pariah at church, at the country club, in all the spaces where she'd built her identity. She moved to Florida to live with her sister, leaving no forwarding address. 6 months after the hearing, I stood in the same courthouse, but this time for a different reason. James and I were there to file paperwork for our business partnership. He would handle the law. I would manage the document preparation service and train others. We would create a model that could be replicated, helping immigrants across Texas navigate the system. By the way, James said as we waited for the clerk, there's something I've been meaning to tell you. That day I first found you in the church basement. It wasn't random. Judge Thompson asked me to check on you to make sure you were doing things correctly. She'd been watching out for you all along. I thought about that, about kindness from unexpected places, about family you choose versus family you're born into, about Judge Thompson and her mother, about all the mothers and fathers and children I'd helped find their place in America. A year later, I started law school, full scholarship with a stipend for living expenses. My first day, I found a card in my student mailbox. No signature, but I recognized the handwriting. My mother had written just 3 words: I was wrong. I kept the card, but didn't respond. Some bridges once burned light the way forward instead of back. The healing didn't come all at once. It came in waves, sometimes gentle, sometimes crushing, but always moving me forward. Those first months after the hearing, I would wake up at 3 in the morning, heart racing, convinced I heard Kevin at my door, or my father's voice on my answering machine. The restraining order was a piece of paper, but trauma doesn't respect legal documents. Dr. Sarah Winters specialized in family trauma, and James had recommended her after seeing me freeze during a consultation when a client's father raised his voice. "You've been in survival mode for so long," she told me during our 3rd session. "Your body doesn't know the war is over." She was right. For 34 years, I had lived in a state of constant vigilance, always waiting for the next criticism, the next demand, the next reminder that I wasn't enough. Even now, free from them, I carried their voices in my head. My mother's disappointed sighs, my father's dismissive grunts, Kevin's mocking laughter, Jessica's superior corrections. But there were other voices now, louder and warmer. Mrs. Rodriguez called every Sunday just to check in, to share recipes, to remind me that I had changed her life. The Nguyen family invited me to every celebration, treating me like the daughter who had helped reunite them. Maria studied with me, 2 women preparing for legal careers that would serve their communities. Law school was harder than I'd imagined, not academically, but emotionally. Sitting in classes about family law, contract law, ethical obligations, I kept seeing my own story reflected in the cases we studied. When we covered malicious prosecution, my classmates discussed it as theory. I knew its weight, its cost, its cruelty. Professor Martinez, no relation to the Father Martinez who'd sheltered me, noticed my reactions. She kept me after class one day, her eyes kind but direct. "You have experience the others don't," she said. "Use it. Let it make you a better advocate, not a bitter one." I threw myself into immigration law with the passion of someone who had found their calling. Every case we studied, every statute we memorized, I thought about my clients. The system was even more complex than I'd realized deliberately so. But now I was learning not just to navigate it, but to challenge it. James and I officially launched our partnership 6 months into my first year. We called it Bridge Legal Services, representing the connection between communities and justice. I trained volunteers in document preparation, while studying creating detailed manuals that would ensure no one else would face what I had faced for helping others. The romance with James hadn't been planned. We were colleagues then, friends, then something more. It started with late nights preparing cases, sharing takeout and stories. He had his own family trauma parents who'd wanted him to be a doctor who saw law as lesser. We understood each other's scars. "You know what I love about you," he said one night over Vietnamese coffee in the office. "You don't pretend the broken parts don't exist. You just built something beautiful around them." The proposal came a year later in the same church basement where he'd first found me. Father Martinez officiated our wedding 6 months after that. The church was full, but not with blood relatives. It was full of chosen family clients who had become friends, attorneys who had become advocates, strangers who had become supporters. Jessica reached out again 2 years after the hearing. She had been in therapy, she said. Real therapy, not the performative kind our mother had sometimes threatened us with. She understood now, she said, the toxicity of how we were raised. The impossible standards, the conditional love that wasn't love at all. We met in a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown. She looked different, softer somehow. The sharp edges our mother had honed were worn down. She was working as a teacher, now elementary school, finding joy in helping children learn. "I was so jealous," she admitted, stirring her coffee endlessly. "You got out, you found purpose. I was the one with the law degree coming, but you were the one actually helping people. I couldn't stand it." "You tried to destroy me," I said simply. "I know, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just trying to explain. Dad made us compete for scraps of approval. Mom made us perform for conditional love. Kevin was the prince who could do no wrong. You were the servant who could never do enough. I was the achievement who could never achieve enough. We were all damaged, but I chose to damage you more instead of healing myself." I listened, but I didn't absolve. Some things can be understood without being forgiven. We parted with civility, but not closeness. She sends Christmas cards, now photos of her classroom, her students. I don't respond, but I don't throw them away either. Kevin never reached out again after his prison sentence. Last I heard, he was in Nevada working at a casino, still gambling with money he didn't have, still blaming everyone else for his choices. Dad died 3 years after the hearing. Heart attack at his desk working on taxes for the small clients he had left. Mom called James's office to inform me following the restraining order, even in grief. I didn't attend the funeral, but I sent flowers. White roses, which he'd always said were wasteful. It felt like the right kind of goodbye. Mom still lives in Florida. She sends letters through James, sometimes updates about her life that I don't read. James keeps them in a file in case I ever want them. I don't think I will, but having the choice feels important. My practice grew beyond anything I'd imagined. After passing the bar, I specialized in family immigration, helping unite families while my own remained fractured. The irony wasn't lost on me, but it felt like balance somehow. For every family my blood relatives had tried to break, I helped dozens stay together. The Domingo family stands out. 3 children citizen born watching their parents face deportation over paperwork errors from 20 years ago. The case was complex, requiring every skill I'd learned, every connection I'd made. When we won, when the judge granted the stay and pathway to citizenship, the children hugged me so tightly I couldn't breathe. "You saved our family," the eldest said, crying into my shoulder. "No," I told her, thinking of my own story. "Your family saved themselves by staying together. I just helped with the paperwork." 5 years after that courtroom confrontation, I was invited to speak at the State Bar Association about access to justice. The same organization my family had tried to use against me now wanted me to share my story. I stood at the podium looking out at hundreds of attorneys and talked about the space between law and justice, between legal services and human services. We guard our profession so carefully, I said, that we sometimes forget who we're meant to serve. Document preparation isn't legal practice, but for many immigrants, it's the difference between staying with their families and deportation. We need to create pathways, not just gatekeeping. The speech was well received, but what mattered more was what came after. Young attorneys approached me wanting to volunteer. Established firms offered pro bono partnerships. The state bar established a committee to explore authorized document preparation programs. Change, real change, was beginning. James and I had our first child that year, a daughter we named Isabella after Judge Thompson's mother. Judge Thompson, now retired, became her honorary grandmother, a role she embraced with joy. At Isabella's first birthday party, surrounded by the family we'd built, I realized something profound. My biological family had tried to destroy me for refusing to stay in my lane, but that destruction had been a kind of birth. From the ashes of who they wanted me to be, I became who I was meant to be. Every attack they launched had pushed me toward my purpose. Every cruelty had taught me compassion. Every rejection had made room for real love. Do you regret it? James asked one evening as we watched Isabella play with the children of clients we'd helped. Not having them in your life? I thought about it, really thought about it. There were moments, especially during holidays, or when Isabella did something remarkable, when I felt the absence. Not of who they were, but of who they could have been. The parents who might have celebrated my success instead of resenting it. The siblings who might have supported instead of sabotaged. I regret that they couldn't be different, I finally answered. But I don't regret choosing to be myself. 10 years have passed since I stood in that courtroom alone at the defendant's table while my family tried to destroy me. Today, I stand in a different courtroom watching as Isabella plays quietly with her toys in the gallery while I argue my 100th immigration case. The irony isn't lost on me that I'm now everything my father said I could never be: a real lawyer, successful, respected, and fulfilled. Bridge Legal Services has expanded to 5 offices across Texas. We employ 15 attorneys, 20 paralegals, and 30 document preparers, all trained in the meticulous methods that once saved me from false prosecution. James handles the complex litigation, while I oversee the community outreach programs. We've helped over 3,000 families navigate the immigration system, and every success story heals something in me that my family broke. Last month, something unexpected happened. A young woman walked into my office, nervous, clutching a worn folder. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her until she spoke. "Aunt Madeline, I'm Sophie, Kevin's daughter." I hadn't known Kevin had a child. She was 22, she explained, raised by her mother after Kevin abandoned them when she was 3. She'd grown up hearing stories about the aunt who helped immigrants, the family scandal no one would fully explain. Now she was in law school, inspired by fragments of my story, wanting to understand what really happened. We talked for 3 hours. I told her everything, showed her the court documents, the restraining orders, the truth her father's family had hidden. She cried when she read Judge Thompson's ruling, seeing her father's lies laid bare in legal language. "I want to be like you," she said finally. "I want to help people. Real help, not whatever twisted version of family loyalty they practiced." She interns with us now, brilliant and determined, carrying the family name toward redemption neither of us expected. Kevin doesn't know she's found me. She hasn't told him she's in law school. She's funding it herself, working 3 jobs, refusing to be dependent on anyone who might use that dependence as control. The speaking engagements come regularly now. Law schools, bar associations, immigrant rights organizations. I tell our story, the whole story, as a cautionary tale about what happens when family becomes a cage, when loyalty becomes chains, when staying in your lane means abandoning your purpose. Young lawyers approach me afterward, sharing their own family traumas, their own struggles between obligation and calling. Maria, Mrs. Rodriguez's daughter, is now a federal immigration judge. We often work on opposite sides of the courtroom, but always with the same goal: justice for families seeking belonging. She recently told me that my case study is required reading in her former law school's ethics class, an example of both malicious prosecution and moral courage. Jessica wrote again last week. She's married, now has 2 children, teaches at an inner-city school where most of her students are immigrants. She includes photos of her classroom walls covered with maps and welcome signs in dozens of languages. She doesn't ask for forgiveness anymore, just shares her life like a distant relative might. I've started writing back just acknowledgments, nothing more. Perhaps someday there might be something more, but healing happens on its own timeline. My mother is 71 now, still in Florida. Through James, I learned she volunteers at a legal aid society, helping elderly immigrants with paperwork. She uses skills she learned watching me, though she's never acknowledged the irony. Her letters have evolved from demands for reconciliation to simple updates about her health. I've instructed James to notify me if she ever needs help, financial or otherwise. Not because she deserves it, but because I've learned that sometimes mercy is more for the giver than the receiver. Dad's grave remains unvisited by me, though I paid for its maintenance for the next 50 years. Not out of love or obligation, but because leaving things undone feels too much like him. That accounting firm mindset he drilled into me remains just redirected toward purposes he could never have imagined. The greatest victory came last year, when the state of Texas officially recognized certified document preparers as a legitimate profession with training programs and ethical standards I helped design. The ceremony was held in the same courthouse where my family tried to destroy me. Judge Thompson, though long retired, attended as an honorary guest. "You didn't just win your case," she told me afterward. "You changed the system. That's the best kind of justice." Isabella is 10 now, trilingual, fierce in her sense of fairness. She knows our story in age-appropriate pieces. She knows some families are born, others are chosen, and the strongest are built from both. She has grandparents in the Rodriguez family, the Nguyens, Father Martinez, and Judge Thompson. She has aunts and uncles from every continent, connected not by blood, but by something stronger. When she asks about my parents, her biological grandparents, I tell her the truth, wrapped in gentleness. Sometimes people who share our blood don't know how to share our values. They loved me the only way they knew how, which wasn't the way I needed. So I had to find people who could love me correctly. She accepts this with the wisdom children possess before adults complicate it. Her family tree, drawn for a school project, looks like a forest, branches reaching in all directions, roots intertwined not by genetics but by choice. The text I cherish most came 6 months ago from an unknown number that I somehow knew was Kevin. It said simply, "You won. I hope it was worth losing us." I didn't respond directly, but that night at dinner with James and Isabella, surrounded by chosen family and the laughter of children whose parents we'd kept together, I knew my answer. Yes, it was worth it, because I didn't lose them. They lost me. And in losing me, they lost the chance to witness what happens when someone refuses to stay in their lane and instead builds their own road. Today, as I prepare for another day of helping families stay together, I think about the word family itself, how it can be a weapon or a shield, a prison or a home. My biological family used it as a chain, something to bind and control. But the family I've built uses it as a bridge, something to connect and support. The greatest lesson from all of this isn't about law or justice or even forgiveness. It's about the courage to become who you're meant to be, even when the people who should support you most become your greatest obstacles. It's about learning that love shouldn't require you to shrink yourself to fit someone else's expectations. It's about understanding that sometimes the family that tries to destroy you is actually setting you free. My name is Madeline. I'm 44 years old now. I'm a mother, a wife, an immigration attorney, and an advocate for families. My own family tried to destroy me for helping others, but that destruction became my foundation for building something better. They reported me for illegal law practice, but the judge already knew the truth that real justice comes not from blood or birth, but from the courage to stand up when it matters most. The judge saw through their lies because truth has a way of surfacing, especially when you've lived it with integrity. Every document I'd prepared with meticulous care, every client I'd referred to proper legal counsel, every boundary I'd maintained between assistance and advice. All of it created a pattern of truth that no amount of family manipulation could erase. That's the final irony, really. My father taught me to document everything, to keep impeccable records, to always have proof. He meant it for accounting, for covering tracks, and creating paper trails that protected wealth. But I use those same skills to protect the vulnerable, to create transparency, where he preferred shadows. The very skills he gave me became the tools of his undoing. If you're watching this and struggling with family who doesn't understand your purpose, who wants you to stay small so they can feel big, who confuses control with love, know this: choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. Sometimes the people who share your DNA don't share your values, and that's okay. You can honor where you came from while choosing where you're going. Family tried to prosecute me for helping strangers, but those strangers became family. They tried to isolate me, but isolation became liberation. They tried to break me financially, emotionally, legally, but every break became a chance to rebuild stronger. What defines family? Is it blood that makes you related, or loyalty that makes you family? Is it the name you're born with, or the name you make for yourself? Is it the people who demand you stay in your lane, or the people who cheer when you build your own road? I know my answer. And if you've stayed with this story until the end, maybe you're finding yours too. How has your family tried to limit your purpose? Have you found the courage to choose your calling over their comfort? Share your story in the comments below. Like this video. If it resonated with you, subscribe. If you want to hear more stories about choosing purpose over approval, and share it with someone who needs to know they're not alone in their struggle for independence. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, sometimes the family that matters most is the one you choose to create.